Random House Audio presents The War, An Intimate History, 1941 to 1945, by Geoffrey C. Ward, based on a Ken Burns film. Read for you by Ken Burns, with Tom Hanks, Josh Lucas, and Rebecca Holtz.
A thousand veterans of the war die every day. This book is dedicated to all those who fought and won that necessary war on our behalf. The greatest cataclysm in history grew out of ancient and ordinary human emotions: anger and arrogance and bigotry, victimhood and the lust for power. And it ended because other human qualities, courage and perseverance and selflessness, faith, leadership, and the hunger for freedom, combined with unimaginable brutality to change the course of human events. The Second World War brought out the best and the worst in a generation, and blurred the two so that they became at times almost indistinguishable. In the killing that engulfed the world from 1939 to 1945, between 50 and 60 million people died, so many and in so many different places that the real number will never be known. More than 85 million men and women served in uniform, but the overwhelming majority of those who perished were civilians, men, women, and children, obliterated by the arithmetic of war. The United States was relatively fortunate. More than 405,000 soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines died, but that figure represented proportionally fewer military casualties than were suffered by any of the other major combatants. American cities were not destroyed. American civilians were never really at risk. Without American power, however, and without the sacrifice of American lives, the struggle's outcome would have been very different. The American economy only grew stronger as the fighting went on, and by the time it ended, the United States would be the most powerful nation on earth, and a once isolated and insular people would find themselves at the center of world affairs. The war touched every family on every street in every town in America. Towns like Luverne, Minnesota, Sacramento, California, Waterbury, Connecticut, and Mobile, Alabama. And nothing would ever be the same again. As World War II drew to a close in the spring of 1945, the CBS radio correspondent Eric Sevareid was troubled. He'd been reporting on the fighting for 4 years, had witnessed the fall of France, parachuted into the Burmese jungle, struggled to keep up with GIs as they battled their way toward Rome and then across southern France. And he had done his best to convey to his listeners back home all that he had seen and heard along the way. But he was haunted by the sense that he had failed. Only the soldier really lives the war, he told his audience. The journalist does not. He may share the soldier's outward life and dangers, but he cannot share his inner life, because the same moral compulsion does not bear upon him. The observer knows he has alternatives of action. The soldier knows he has none. War happens inside a man, and that is why, in a certain sense, you and your sons from the war will be forever strangers. If, by the miracle of art and genius, in later years 2 or 3 among them can open their hearts and the right words come, then perhaps we shall know a little of what it was like, and we shall know then that all the present speakers and writers hardly touched the story. This book, and the documentary series it accompanies, was created in that spirit. In it, men and women opened their hearts about the war they knew, and which we, their inheritors, can only imagine. This project was born out of great reluctance. 17 years ago, we published a book and released an 11.5-hour, 9-part film on the American Civil War. For years, Those of us who were engaged with those projects struggled daily to understand the 4 horrible years in our national life when, in order to become one, we tore ourselves in two. Our series on the Civil War began with a short quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. He had been wounded 6 times during that conflict and would go on to serve his country once more as a Supreme Court justice. He said, "We have shared the incommunicable experience of war. We have felt, we still feel, the passion of life at its top. In our youths, our hearts were touched with fire." Holmes was struggling himself to put into words what every soldier who has faced combat knows in his or her guts. That paradoxically, when your life is most threatened, when violent death is possible at any moment, everything is vivified. The intensity of experience heightened to a level not felt in ordinary life. War creates a terror, an excruciating, unbearable terror, that is not only repellent, but undeniably and inexplicably compelling. It is an almost indescribable feeling that survivors of war from the beginning of recorded history have found overwhelming, intimidating, and haunting, yet also seductive and spellbinding. Shortly after Appomattox, Walt Whitman, a Brooklyn journalist and sometime poet who had worked as a nurse in the appalling Union hospitals, warned posterity of what he had seen. "Future years," he wrote, "will never know the seething hell and the black infernal background of the countless minor scenes and interiors of the Secession War, and it is best they should not. The real war," Whitman insisted, "will never get in the books." That certainty, that it is impossible to describe accurately the experience of war, has not kept novelists and writers, historians and documentary filmmakers from trying. But for years after our Civil War series was aired, we vowed we would not attempt another film about the subject of war. At first, we didn't want to be typecast or seen to be exploiting the unexpected success of our Civil War film and book. But we also didn't want to descend again into the frightening but also mesmerizing parallel universe of war, with its inevitable suffering, loss, catastrophe, and death. But several years ago, 2 statistics began to erode that conviction for us. After years of deflecting requests that we do something specifically on World War II, we learned to our alarm that 1,000 veterans of the Second World War were dying each day in America, that we were losing among our fathers and grandfathers a direct connection to the deeds of that unusually reticent generation. It seemed clear that if we, the inheritors of the world they struggled so hard to create for us, neglected to hear them out before they passed away, we would be guilty of a historical amnesia too irresponsible to countenance. The second statistic was just as troubling as the first. Among a number of demoralizing facts about the continuing crisis in our schools over what our children know and don't know, one item stood out. It seems that an unacceptably large number of graduating high school seniors think we fought with the Germans, against the Russians, in the Second World War. We found that we could no longer ignore the subject. 6 years ago, therefore, we committed to working on a film series and companion book that have just now been completed, a massive project that has consumed and transformed everyone who has worked on it. You will soon meet in this book human beings who are about to descend into the madness of global war, all of whom you will know by the end almost like family members. These will not be the traditional top-down heroes we are usually presented with, the generals, the presidents and statesmen, the prime ministers and field marshals who tend to recede from our understanding just as they ascend to the pantheon of great men. These are folks you might have had Thanksgiving with, men whose stories of war are just now being told. And most of the people who narrate our account of the most complex conflict in history come not from the centers of population and power in the United States, but from 4 geographically distributed, to some extent isolated towns: Luverne, Minnesota; Sacramento, California; Waterbury.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?